The prefecture of Okinawa has long been a favored destination for tourists. Yet, few know that it once belonged to a long-forgotten country, the Kingdom of Ryukyu. So what exactly happened? How did this country vanish from the face of the earth? The Kingdom of Ryukyu was founded in the 15th century on the archipelago called the Ryukyu Islands. Situated along the outer edge of East Asia, these islands run parallel to China's southeastern coastline and form an arc stretching between China's Taiwan and Japan. The word Ryukyu comes from the Chinese word Liuqiu, meaning giant dragon. Even before the kingdom was founded, the local people established a tributary relationship with China's Ming dynasty in 1372. During the following 5 centuries until 1866, the imperial courts of the Ming and Qing dynasties sent imperial envoys to Ryukyu 24 times to confer titles on the Ryukyu king. China's Ming court bestowed the surname Shang upon the then Ryukyu king. In 1392, Chinese Emperor Hongwu dispatched boatmen and sailors from southern China's Fujian province to settle in Ryukyu to boost trade and travel. Those sent from Fujian represented dozens of Chinese family names, which later gave rise to the earliest community of Chinese descendants in Ryukyu, living peacefully alongside the indigenous peoples. Relations with China brought the kingdom a steady flow of trade and even shaped its political system, Confucian culture, calendar, and production techniques. Over the centuries, Ryukyans developed customs, rituals, and a cultural identity distinct from those of Japan.
Since time immemorial, Okinawa was an independent country known as Ryukyu. Ryukyu was recognized by China, Korea, Southeast Asia, the United States, France, and the Netherlands, and even by Japan itself as an independent country.
Japan has long coveted the Ryukyu Islands. In 1609, Japanese warriors invaded and brought northern Ryukyu under its control. The Meiji government declared Ryukyu a Japanese domain in 1872. 7 years later, it forcibly abolished the Ryukyu kingdom. The northern Amami Islands were incorporated into Japan's Kagoshima prefecture, while the other islands stretching southward became Okinawa prefecture. Japan's annexation of Ryukyu was met with strong opposition from China's Qing court and persistent resistance from the indigenous Ryukyans. So, does Japan actually have legal sovereignty over these islands? We need to go back to the end of World War II, where the map of today's world was drawn. In late 1943, leaders of China, the US, and UK met in Cairo to discuss the progress of the war against Japan and the future of Asia. They issued the Cairo Declaration stating that Japan shall be stripped of all the islands in the Pacific which she has seized or occupied since the beginning of the First World War in 1914, and Japan will also be expelled from all other territories which she has taken by violence and greed. In 1945, in an ultimatum to Japan called the Potsdam Proclamation, the Allied forces spelled out exactly where Japan's boundaries laid. Article 8 states the terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out and Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine. Note that Ryukyu is not mentioned, and that Japan's sovereignty shall be determined by Allied powers. When Japan surrendered in 1945, it officially accepted these terms. Another document, dated the following year, further underscores Japan's lack of sovereignty over Okinawa. The Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers issued to Japan a legally binding document called Scapin 677. This document limited Japan's power of administration to these 4 main islands and some small adjacent islands north of the 30th parallel north. Now, where's Okinawa? It's here. You see the problem? So how did it come about that Japan now regained control of Okinawa? In 1946, the US told Japan, your boundary stops at 30th parallel north, which Okinawa lies outside. Japan had no objections. But 5 years later, things changed. In 1951, as the Cold War began to unfold, the United States concocted the Treaty of San Francisco, which was not recognized by China and the Soviet Union. This so-called treaty placed the Ryukyu Islands under the United Nations trusteeship and made the US the sole administering authority. Bear in mind, the US had no legal right to do this.
旧金山和会是吧？把我们中国来讲，这样一个在这个抗战中是吧？这个世界反法西斯这个战争做出重大贡献和牺牲的国家，是吧？排除这样一个会议之外，还有一个决定怎么说呢？就是不能够单独与怎么说呢？与这样一个日本这一法西斯国家单独议和的这样一个原则性的这样一个要求，是吧？所以来讲，我们说来讲这一个旧金山会议所签署的这样一个旧金山合约，它是一种片面的合约，是一个非法的、无效的合约，也是个不正义的合约。
As the Cold War heated up, Ryukyu quickly took on strategic importance for both the US and Japan. During the next 20 years, the prefecture would serve as an important knot in what's known as the First Island Chain, a string of US military bases off China's east coast. Then, in 1971, after 27 years of illegal rule, the US made another illegitimate move. It transferred to Japan full responsibility and authority for the exercise of all and any powers of administration, legislation, and jurisdiction over the territory and its inhabitants. The US was careful to only list administrative, legislative, and judicial authority, not sovereignty. It won't surprise you, no one ever asked the local people for their opinion. In fact, the Japanese government has even refused to recognize them as indigenous people. Why? Okinawans, or Ryukyans, are the original inhabitants of the Ryukyu Islands. After centuries of interactions with China, their way of life became heavily influenced by Chinese culture. They had their own distinct languages, which were banned under the imperialist government of Japan when it annexed the territory in 1879.
脱民以后，日本长期在这个琉球呢，这个对原住民权益进行了很多的这个侵犯，包括消灭他们的语言，消灭他们的习俗，强迫他们这个日本同化啊，那么甚至在这个经济上对他们采取这个殖民掠夺政策，然后以及包括这个在很多的这个政策方面的话，那么对他们实行这个歧视、区别化待遇。
Although the actual number of Ryukyuan people is unknown, some scholars estimate that it could be as high as 60% of today's Okinawan population. However, the Japanese government still refuses to recognize them as indigenous people.
所以这个日本人其实他们是心知肚明的，因为这个如果一旦是承认他们是原住民，那么就涉及到日本对他的这个侵略和吞并。所以这个所以日本人呢，他们非常喜欢一个说法，就叫做日琉同主论，就说，这个历史上琉球的跟日本人本来就是一家的，但是这个的话，其实应该是不符合这个历史事实的。
Due to the strategic location of their land, Ryukyans have suffered more than their fair share of bloodshed. During the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, one of the bloodiest in World War II, at least 100,000 local civilians were either killed in combat or ordered to commit suicide by the Japanese military, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. After the war, Ryukyans had to watch as their land was taken to build U.S. military bases. Home to the largest U.S. military presence in the region, the island hosts some 70% of U.S. military bases and half of U.S. military personnel stationed across Japan. In recent years, the deployment of Japan's self-defense forces to Okinawa has also expanded rapidly, further intensifying the discriminatory situation, according to local human rights groups. Crimes against women and girls, noise pollution, contaminated drinking water, and higher levels of poverty are just some of the problems suffered by the local people. For decades, Ryukyans have been fighting for their voices to be heard. The United Nations has also urged the Japanese government to take appropriate action to protect their rights. In October 2025, China's Deputy Permanent Representative Sun Lei called on Japan to improve the social status of women and eliminate discrimination against Okinawans and other indigenous peoples. A chain of islands in the Pacific Ocean, annexed by Japan, turned into a huge military base with its indigenous people forced to endure deep-rooted discrimination. This, unfortunately, is the true story of the forgotten people of Ryukyu.